Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Urban Air Planning Forum 2022 Part 2. Thank you for joining us, and especially thank you to our sponsors today, Tech Tower, and our supporters, RPAS UK, CAMI, Coventry City Council, DJB, Flying Forward 2020, Flight Crowd, Urban Airport, and the Great Urban Air Mobility News. My name is Philip Butterworth-Hayes. I'm the Director of Communications and Strategy at Savata Global, which is a trade association formed to bring councils, local authorities, and the industry together in a single community to develop urban air mobility services. Behind the scenes, we have Kitty and Tash who are doing all the real work, and thanks to you both. Just a very quick piece of housekeeping to go through. We plan to keep on time. The event is being recorded. More details will come soon. The chat function is at the bottom of your screen, so please say hi and tell us that you're here and where you're from. And please, of course, get involved in the chat. You can directly chat to us, to the speakers, and to the panelists and attendees. Make sure you include everyone in it. If you want to ask a question, again, it's a small box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions for our speakers, then please post them in here and we'll try to get as many answers as we can throughout the session. So getting back to today, here's the agenda. Yesterday, we spoke with local authority leaders in Coventry about their vision for the future of urban air mobility and how it'll fit into their city's air transport and transport plans. Unsurprisingly, there were a lot more questions than answers, but it's a new industry, so that's not surprising. But one conclusion was clear, that the industry will only really gain the traction it needs to move at the speed it wants to if we get the support of local politicians, local authorities and local politicians. And given the number of competing challenges that local politicians have, this is a tough challenge. But it's not impossible. And today we'll be exploring in more depth the passenger and public perceptions to UAM and the key role that the Air One demonstrator at Coventry could play in this, as for the first time, the public will be able to see and hear drone operations take place from an operational city centre location and start to understand the scale of what is possible with eVTOL flights. So in the following two sessions, I want to start to gather material that we can present to local politicians everywhere, just to explain exactly the benefits and some of the challenges that urban air mobility will bring to their communities. It would be great if we could work with a network. So the same message goes throughout the world, that urban air mobility is not the same as what's come before. There'll be challenges, but the benefits it'll bring in terms of environmental improvements, it's just the sheer excitement of being able to fly in an electric air taxi through the urban sky, which is still quite extraordinary and magical to me, will be hugely beneficial, and will show that they're part of the modern age and they're moving forward. And it's all about pride in the community, as well as meeting all the important environmental and other targets which every local authority has. It's fantastic that we've got some of the world's leading, in fact, I would say the world's leading experts today to talk about this, to talk about very much what urban air mobility means to passengers and to the public, and then how we frame that in the political agenda. So if we just go through that agenda today, as you see, we have a fine panel. Before we introduce everybody and ask some questions, I'd like to ask Matt Banham from Tech Tower, who's our sponsor today, to give a brief introduction. Thanks, Matt.
Hi, guys. Yeah, I'm the founder and CTO of an organization called Tech Tower. Hopefully you can see my screen. Basically, Tech Tower, my background is mainly in air traffic management systems and engineering, and also flight control systems. Pretty much been in aviation for the past 20 years. And I started a company to really start to see urban air mobility come to life. So I was in charge of a project called IFAX, which is the system the air traffic controllers use for managing all 9,000 flights per day, safety critical. There's never failed 6.5 million run hours, never failed once to ensure that our skies are safe. And we work with people such as Heathrow, NATS, Altitude Angel, IEG, a few universities, and we have people that really understand the cutting edge of technology, for instance, augmented reality, embedded IoT, machine learning, blockchain, that kind of thing. So we've developed a product called SimTwin, which is a collaborative airspace design and simulation tool. So I was watching my son play with his friends on one of these massive multiplayer online games. I think it was either Call of Duty or Fortnite. And I realized that all of them have disparate backgrounds. You know, some are into music, some are into PE and arts, etc. But somehow they're all able to come together around a digital twinning type tool and able to achieve that singular goal of killing the enemy. And I thought, why can we not have a similar thing in aviation for design? You know, so that's why we built SimTwin. It's a multi-stakeholder digital twin of the future airspace. But more importantly, we know we don't have all the answers. So why don't we make it extensible? So we make it an extensible marketplace platform for predictive capabilities, whether it's noise, whether it's wind, whether it's routing, whether it's capacity, whether it's exception handling of the airspace. And then I realized that it's no good just doing this to make it for industry experts. We need something that's immersive, that can have that immersive experience, that can get this through public perception and do public perception modeling with the tool as well. So we want to try and bring this future of air mobility to life. So our kind of USP, if you like, is we're the only digital twin, as far as we're aware, that really models the emerging UAM, AAM, eVTOL airspace and integrates with legacy ATM. Now, what I mean by that is if you read some of the PwC reports from a couple of years ago, we're looking at an airspace which potentially is going to have up to 76,000 aircraft, you know, with the drones, eVTOLs, etc. That's going to dwarf that 9,000 general aviation flights. So you need that integration. You can't always operate in specialized corridors for this. We have a full physics engine, so we're able to do surveillance, conflict detection, communication, so comms, weather, complex routing, flight dynamics. And lastly, as I say, it's a massive multiplayer online game. So we don't just concentrate on one component like many digital twins do. Our aim is to try and model the whole system of systems and make it safe and relevant, particularly for you people that are in public planning, public perception, and are having to go to councils and make the argument as to why this is relevant for your city. So to demonstrate the problem, an eVTOL operator wants to operate efficient, cost-effective green air taxi routes. You have to interact with all of these other people, all with their different perspectives. And our assertion is that SimTwin is one of the components that can make this easy for you. An immersive, experiential, but also highly accurate digital twin. So that's what we're about. If you have any questions, please do follow up. That there's more we can show you of the tool and give you demonstrations and hopefully answer some of your questions. Back to you, Phil.
Thanks, Matt. That's really interesting. There are all sorts of worlds coming together in this space. Gaming world looks like it could play an important part in that. So that's great. Thank you. I'd now like to have a quick chat with Darren Halder. Darren is from Urban Airport, and Urban Airport is the organisation that's put together the concept here. And what we're going to see now is a very quick video of what actually an urban airport, a vertiport will look like for passengers going through. And this is, thank you very much indeed to Professor Stephen Birrell from Coventry University, who's developed this video. And it's a walkthrough of the vertiport so we can actually see what it looks like from a passenger viewpoint. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, so now we're having a chat with Darren. Are you there? Fantastic. We're getting on there. I see that all modern places we have a table tennis table there, 2 table tennis tables.
Hi, can you hear me and see me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you see me? Okay.
Yes, good, great.
Fantastic. So, Darren, your background is in airport planning. Isn't this just a small airport? What are the real commercial, operational, and security challenges that you came across when you came to design Air One?
Yes, indeed, my background is planning airport terminals and airport master planning, and I've been doing that for 24 years now, exclusively. The challenge here, of course, we are sited in the heart of cities where we are constrained in terms of the site area and locations that we could host a vertiport. And they often occur in very sensitive downtown areas where perhaps the approach for flight is very much restricted. So we had to come up with a design that allows us to have a very compact footprint. Yes, so we tend to regard ourselves as, you know, the world's smallest airport. Not just physically, but in terms of the environmental footprint. Now, we've come up with a very innovative way to deal with the airfield. In traditional airport sense, the airfield is comprised of, let's say, the TLOF, which is the final approach takeoff area, and you have a taxiway system that links you to an aircraft stand, which sits beside the airport terminal. So what we've done with Air One, we've actually turned that vertically and have what we call a vertical airfield. So the flight ops would occur at the top level. That's operated by our TLOF landing platform, which is really the center space that is captured in that VR video where the aircraft sits. So at that top level is where flight activity takes place. So engines on, lift off, and likewise on the landing sequence, the approach, engines off, and then it's lowered, in essence, taxiing down to the aircraft stand level, where you would have disembarkation, and if required, charging into one of the hangar spaces, and then subsequently boarding for the next flight. So this is really then in terms of airport planning, the heart and center of the functionality of Air One. The FATO, surrounded by the associated support spaces as the hangar, the command and control center. We've demonstrated there's also potential for cargo operations. So that takes one quadrant of that party. And of course, front of house, the front door, we have what hopefully the public will realize is a very familiar departure lounge area. We've got F&B in terms of the cafe bar. We've got some travel retail and F&B. So these are very familiar environments for the travelers. You often find these at airports and transport interchange. So everything to really demystify a new building type, because vertiports are in essence a new building type that's never been constructed before. And here in Coventry, we actually have the world's first real life demonstrator to really heighten the public's awareness of what this technology is all about. They get the chance to feel comfortable with technology. They get to touch and feel. and navigate and to really live some of the sequences that's shown there by Professor Birrell and his team.
Two interesting unrelated points. How difficult was it to get planning permission for this? As this building doesn't exist and has never existed before as a type, how difficult was it for the local authority to put a stamp of approval on it? And secondly, what sort of turnaround times are you looking at when you consider a design like this, where you have a lifting, takeoff and landing area?
Yeah, just to touch on the first point, and we discussed this yesterday, and it was explained that we couldn't have done this, of course, without the support of Coventry City Council. They are our partners in the project, and they are instrumental in helping us find a site. We looked at the Ricoh Centre site initially, but really we want that connectivity to other intermodal transportation, so that intermodal capability exists in this site, which is the Westminster parking, which is only 3 minutes a zone throw to the station. So it is very much integrated into the heart of Coventry City. In terms of the consenting, of course, we still, it's still very much a iterative process. We're still undergoing the planning application process with the council as we speak. We had to also seek approval for the flight ops from the Coventry Airport because we're flying within their flight restriction zone. We have to, even for a very short flight across the road to the next door parking lot, apply for each flight demonstrations that we've had in the past 2 weeks. And with that comes with the requirement for 50-meter safety zone, which we had to enforce, which means we have to close our front doors. Nobody leaves the vertiport. Everybody has to completely clear away from that zone until the flight activity is over. So there's still work to be done in looking at ways around that to perhaps relax that as time proves that the aircraft and the flight performance are actually quite safe and very much different than other form of aircraft.
That's great. So, and in terms of turnaround time, Darren, what sort of turnaround time are you looking at here?
Well, we have a single FATO, which of course can accommodate one air taxi at a time. It is a split FATO, and that if it is to provide cargo services or logistics services, you can split it and have it acting independently. But what we wanted to demonstrate here in very simplest form is a single FATO, and that allows us to showcase all the functionality that's associated with a vertiport. It does limit turnaround operations, especially if you just have a single hangar configuration, because the hangar allows you to pull the aircraft off the FATO and to free it up for the next flight.
Sorry, and the FATO is the takeoff and landing area.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay,
but we have other areas. If, for example, the command control center can go remote, and we envisage in the future this might be the case, then we free up then another space for a second hangar. And likewise, if we thought that cargo operations are not required, we have potential for a third hangar, which means you've got then 3 hangar configuration, which will assist the turnaround times. But indeed, yes, you are limited to passenger throughput, just having that single FATO. But we find that this is appropriate for an urban setting in terms of reducing the footprint. And we absolutely think it is a good starting point in terms of demonstrating the technology, in terms of demonstrating the flight ops capabilities. Indeed, the air infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, and the physical infrastructure. And that really is the purpose of Air One demonstrator in Coventry.
Brilliant. Darren, thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful. I'd now like to sort of throw this open for discussion with the wider board, and I'd like to introduce our panel in this session. We have Jolanta Wolf, who got up very early in Seattle to say hello. Jolanta is the Executive Director of the Community Air Mobility Initiative in the USA, which is really doing the heavy lifting work in terms of bringing local authorities at state and city level with industry together to work through some of these issues, and has tremendous experience in here. Maria Tarbanowska, co-founder of FlightCrowd, one of the really most important people in this entire industry at the moment. Maria has been pioneering the public engagement with students and other people to introduce urban air mobility academically throughout schools, and it's a really fantastic and very important role. Kerry Blakeman from West Midlands Police. Hi Kerry. It's great to have you here. Kerry's been helping to run some of the police demonstrations from the vertiport, and obviously picking up a lot of information about what people think about that. And Matt's still with us from Tactile, and I tell you what, that's a really interesting simulation that you have there, because one of the things that we need one single space where everybody can actually say, yeah, this is going to work, this doesn't work, we're happy with that, and that's a very important digital platform. So what I'm going to do is ask you all just one question to get us all going, and then we'll get into the wider discussion and bring in some of the comments that we've had on the board. Jolanta, what's your impression from what's happening in the USA about the speed and direction in which urban air mobility is happening, and how states and cities are embracing it? Is it a hard sell? I mean, what's happening over there?
Thanks, Phil. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to speak to you from the Seattle area on the West Coast. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I think one of the important starting points when we talk about this topic is understanding that this has been to date a tech push market. This is a market that has come about through the convergence of multiple technologies like electric propulsion, distributed propulsion, data networks, autonomy, new materials that have allowed us to develop these new types of aircraft. But we don't have, this is not technology that was developed in response to a specific market demand at the local level. So when you zoom out a bit and you look at this from a transportation and urban planning perspective, it becomes clear that we need to do more work on that demand side. I think another important point is to remember is that this is for the first time we have two distinct communities coming together. Aviation as a form of transportation has existed and operated separate from the other forms of transportation. Typically, we think of ground, underground, even maritime, who often work together. When you think of urban transportation systems or metropolitan transportation systems, light rail and bus work together in terms of operations, in terms of infrastructure. So when you view that in this view this new opportunity in that perspective, it becomes really important to start with conversations at the state, provincial, county, municipal level to both educate the decision makers and planners at that level so that they understand what this new form of transportation is and what the opportunities are, and to allow them to start to think how it might be beneficial in their community. And that's the work that CAMI does, to directly interact with those jurisdictions, educate, and then help develop the implementation integration pathways that make sense for them. Phil, you're on mute.
Thank you. Just on that, in Coventry, we have a CEO of a council there who is very proactive, very passionate about this. When you speak to local authorities in the States, do you have to sell them the idea, or have they already heard of it? How far has that messaging got across?
Let me share a few data points from a survey that University of California, Berkeley did last summer, and we helped them a little bit on some of the questions. So in the survey, UC Berkeley reached out to, I believe, a little over 100, well, they reached out to more, but they had responses from a little bit over 100 different municipal players. So they may have been state departments of transportation, local planning departments, or local departments of transportation, and MPOs, which here are metropolitan planning organizations. They're federally mandated transportation planning organizations that cover a certain metropolitan area. And of those respondents, 47% said that their agencies are currently incorporating advanced air mobility, urban air mobility into existing plans. Now, these are plans that are typically reviewed and redone at a 5 to 10 year pace. So, but the fact that they're actually incorporating it into their plans, I think, is very encouraging in terms of understanding, in terms of knowing that this is on their radar. So I think that gives us at least a data point to understand. With our urban air policy collaborative cohort program that we run for public agencies, it's a 9-week curriculum that does a deep dive and a broad dive into understanding what advanced air mobility is and how it might be integrated into us at a local or metropolitan level. I would say that most of the staff, we've probably had 60, 70 staff come through now, are aware of it, but want to understand more.
Brilliant, thank you. Maria, you've been working in the UK as well as elsewhere on this whole idea of levels of public perception, understanding what this will entail. And I'm interested in your views about whether we should lump drones in together with eVTOLs, or whether it's all part of your view, it's part of the same process, or perhaps they're separate. But when you speak to people, Maria, and especially sort of, younger generation, what's the feeling? Great, it's fantastic. This will never work. It's a dream. What are your conclusions?
Sure. Thank you very much, Phil, for the introductions and for having me here, Survata Global and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here, joined by so many fantastic speakers. And Phil, answering your question, I think it's very, very interesting to see, to be interacting with young people, because it provides that fresh perspective that I don't normally hear from friends and colleagues who are slightly more knowledgeable, slightly more advanced in their life, or working for other industries. We adults, let's put it this way, we're often concerned with noise and costs and privacy, but if you speak to young people especially, they always ask questions about equality, diversity and inclusion of this industry. They ask about sustainability aspect, they ask about environmental impact. They ask about impact on wildlife, which I think is again a little bit of a well, it's a great insight into how we as an industry should be not only marketing ourselves, but I think how we should be, the things that we should be really discussing. Again, the topic of wildlife, and I've attended quite a few conferences in the last 5 years of me working in the industry, is barely touched normally. And this is something that I think is very, very important if we are to make sure that this industry is supported by the future generations, if we are to make sure that this industry is, you know, thrive enough to all of us retire. We need to make sure that we speak the same language as the future generations. And it is necessary to speak to them right now, to find out about their worries, to find out about their passions, their interests, and be able to adjust our thinking and our vision in line with how they see it. That's why Flightcrowd is so passionate about empowering. Well, I certainly am. I'm making sure that everyone who is within the team is always very, very passionate about empowering people to shape this future. I'm a great believer that it doesn't matter what your background is, you can still contribute to this industry. It doesn't matter how many years of experience you have. You know, none of us have studied advanced air mobility as a degree, none of us. But we all came together to work on this solution, to work on this problem, and come up with some innovative solutions. And look at how well we've done already. Imagine how great it will be in the next couple of years when we open our doors to people with young who are very young, with different perspectives and with different ideas. I think it'll be a much more interesting, more collaborative space, and a much more refreshing environment, I think, compared to your traditional aerospace and defense industry, which again, I have, and probably quite a few of us have experience working in. I think it's the times of you know, quite a certain type of individuals who are leading the aerospace industry are gone, and we are really here to become different. We need to build this industry differently, and hence it is so important to be interacting with people who are not a part of this ecosystem. And as I like saying, you know, we definitely do need to pierce that bubble that we've created. It's a great community that we have, air mobility community, future flight community. And talking about the drones, I was at first sort of resisting of Flightcrowd looking into drones, but more and more I see ourselves being involved in those discussions as well. I think it is a future flight community, and yes, it is nice and cozy to know you, me, and a couple of other people who are all working together, but we need to open the doors to those who are not yet involved in this, and we need to be challenged. And we need
absolutely. And on that, is there anything that the industry is, you know, powering ahead, doing all these wonderful things? Is there anything which they haven't taken account of that worries you? Is there any, when you talk to people, and then when you talk to the industry, where are the gaps?
Great question. There are quite a few, but I think I would like to focus on especially on the ED&I aspect. So, you know, if we're talking about creating an industry from scratch, we need to make sure that it is accessible and inclusive of needs of a variety of people. Again, everyone keeps saying, no, you know, we're all the same. We keep pretending that the whole world is the same and all individuals have the same abilities, but we aren't. We don't speak the same languages. We don't have the same needs, be it physical disabilities, be it, you know, learning disabilities, learning difficulties. Everyone has different needs, and we need to make sure that this industry, the digital solutions, the physical solutions, are there to meet the needs of a variety of stakeholders. So that's sort of the one aspect. And the second aspect I think I would like to focus on specifically is a future workforce, and engaging with the wider community that is at the moment doesn't have their say, doesn't have a way to shape this future. Again, as completely agree with Jolanta, it has been an industry push rather than a market pull. So the community didn't come there to us and ask for us to invent the air taxis. And so the question is, well, how long are we going to be working on these R&D solutions and just keeping them in our hangars and just playing with it between the engineers? And is it ever going to become a solution for the masses? And if it would, then it's really time to start working with the future workforce, the makers, the manufacturers, the operators, the pilots, and the end users. And so this is what, you know, Flightcrowd is trying to boil the ocean. But those are things that we're specifically passionate about, and I think these really need to be addressing by our colleagues.
Absolutely, and Maria, you're doing a fantastic job. And one of the problems with this industry is that all the money is focused in one area, which is building eVTOLs, but everything else is problematic. So we don't have the resources. So I don't know how we get around that. But Kerry, and this is a really important time to come to you now, because you've been flying drones in the West Midlands for a long time. I know before you did any takeoffs, you did an extensive public consultation to let people know about what it is that you were doing. Was there any surprises that you came across in that consultation? And are there any reactions now you'd like to share with us about, now people know and experience a bit more what their reactions have been, what the wider public reactions have been?
Thanks, Phil. I'm very conscious, just picking up on what Maria said there around public consent. So the British model of policing is exactly that. We police by consent. So we need to secure the consent of the public with anything that we do. So what was really important is, before we even put a drone up into the sky from a policing perspective, was to seek the views of the public around the West Midlands. And it was the feedback that we received was overwhelmingly positive. And the work since then that the team have done is they haven't just continued with that. They haven't rested on their laurels. They've gone into communities, hard to reach communities. They've gone into schools, and they've had that conversation around how we use drones and why we use drones. The fact that we're not actually spying on people, but we're actually using them to reduce crime and to protect the public. And I think one of the good things as well is the way that the team has been funded, is that the majority of the funding has actually come from money seized from criminals, known as the Proceeds of Crime Act. So we've used those funds to actually to purchase drones, to purchase the technology, to train our officers to become drone pilots. And certainly the desire to be at Urban Airport, and West Midlands Police were delighted to be the only police service represented at Urban Airport, was to actually to showcase our current use of drones, but also what we wanted to do in the future, and that is that beyond visual line of sight flights. And we've had, I don't know if Darren's got the exact numbers in, but we've had over 1,000 visitors to Urban Airport. The police stand has been extremely popular, the police flights, demonstrating our capabilities, but also talking about what we plan to do in the future. And the overwhelming feedback is completely positive, and we have in effect secured that consent of the public as we move forward beyond visual line of sight trials.
Phil, can I add to that at all?
Yeah.
I mean, some of those comments were fantastic, Kerry, and really useful to hear. I mean, I was at the Urban Airport launch, and for us, I think I commented, I'm from Leicester, and I said to someone it was the most exciting thing to happen to the Midlands since Leicester won the Premier League, basically. And it was just fantastic, because we've been working with Supernal for a few months, basically. I think they've been very, very influential on guiding SimTwin. Another aspect of drones and BVLOS is actually making the airspace safe, and not just for police drones, but also for commercial drone operators, as well as for sort of leisure. And I don't think people realise the scale of this. Like, I've just finished some work with the Civil Aviation Authority, and currently in the UK we have 270,000 drone operators, with a further 30,000 that actually have the proper formal CAA, GVC, or, well, not necessarily GVC, but certainly have the formal commercial training. And as part of the work, which has, aspects of it have been published, so I can actually comment on a little bit on it. We did a mass survey of the remote piloting community and drone community. And what was really interesting is our aspect was really, we need information to make the sky safe. And there's this inherent thing about, we're worried that if we report anything that's unsafe, then, we'll get done for that. But actually, what was overwhelming about it was they respect that the UK in particular has a just culture, when we want to get the feedback so we can make things better for everyone. And what was really interesting was just how many drone operators want to actually make the sky safe, And they want to do it because in doing so, there'll be more places where they can find that they can fly. So I think there's a very positive spirit within the RPAS community that is going to help us drive out some of the emerging regulation that's needed to actually get things like BVLOS in place. And I think as a community, you know, across whether it's local authorities, whether it's people in traditional GA, or whether it's in you know, sort of the uncrewed traffic, if you like, I think we need to really bounce off that positive momentum and that spirit we've got right now to really drive this forward and accelerate it. Whilst we have, if you like.
I'm slightly worried about what everybody I've spoken to here tells me that when we've done these surveys, everybody's positive. It's tremendous stories to tell. It's absolutely great. And yet, you know, I've never seen a drone fly. I've been around the world and I've never seen a drone commercially operating anywhere. So I know there are reasons for that, and there are regulations of why that doesn't happen. And obviously when we go to BVLOS in 2024, whenever that's going to be, it's going to be much easier. But we haven't really come across any major negative reaction to this. There hasn't been any organized, disruptive, we don't want this, for whatever reason, political opposition. And I think we could well be lulling ourselves into a sense of false security to believe that this wonderful honeymoon period is going to last forever, because I don't think it will. No. And I think at some stage, we're going to have to be very careful about how we frame some of the problem areas. I mean, Jolanta, you've experienced this in the States with all sorts of anti-5G sort of opposition and all sorts of stuff that people get online now and start posting stuff, and very quickly you can get an organized opposition. So, is there any feeling in the USA, for example, that this isn't wholly good, that there are issues that need to be resolved, and how we should start going about that?
Oh, I think very much so. And I would say, you know, to speak kind of very broadly about that, those reactions, I could broadly categorize them at the local public agency level as well as the general public level, and they're not the same. So, you know, when we talk about public agents at the public agency level, and in the States or in North America, I'm speaking, you know, state, provincial, tribal, city, region, metropolitan region, any non-national or federal level. I think, you know, the primary concerns that we see with this coming form of transportation are around equity issues, around integration with other forms of transportation, around safety, and around noise. So, and broadly community environmental impacts. So I, you know, that again, that's a very broad statement. There are, you know, another significant concern is just making the choices between limited public resources, and even within the realm of transportation. Do we as a public agency put money towards this versus beefing up our levels of service on our transit? From a public perspective, I think we also have seen in the States a lot of pushback, in particular with small drones, with SUAS. And I think, you know, one of the important differences there is that the drone industry has grown out of a hobby industry, which is an important distinction from where we see urban air mobility or advanced air mobility coming. It is more intentionally coming, leading with a commercial or first responder applications rather than a massive push for private vehicles. air vehicles. So I think there's a difference, but there's still some of that legacy of concern from the general public about what this looks like. I think what we don't want to see is a lot of prohibitory local regulations that come in place in advance of really understanding what this will look like.
And I think that's a key point, isn't it? Because there is a local community will have one view, and other parts of society will have different views. And how do you regulate this locally, and how do you regulate this nationally? Kerry, I mean, when you look at what you want to be doing in 5 years' time, using police drones, do you expect to have the same level of public acceptance then when you're flying automated beyond visual line of sight and perhaps autonomous at some stage, drones doing all sorts of things?
Yeah, I just there was just one point I just want to pick up on that just before I come on to that, Bill. I don't know if people are aware, but we actually received a visit from a YouTube influencer at Urban Airport, known as, like Auditing Britain, who audit the public services. And they were literally challenging the drone team that were there about how they use drones and how they interact. It is available on YouTube, but the officers on the team handled themselves very professionally. And it was really interesting to see, whereas other examples where they challenge officers about their rights and their powers, the drone team certainly knew their stuff. So to kind of like segue into that, I think this isn't just a one-off exercise of having a conversation with the public about the acceptance of drones, but our presence at Urban Airport was to have those questions and start talking about beyond visual line of sight, and to what that looks like in the future. So we never assume it's not just a tick box exercise, it is a continual engagement with the public, because if we haven't got that support, then we won't be able to to operate. I think what we've found is, as an emergency service, we've had the fewest restrictions in terms of flights from Urban Airport because of our emergency powers, as it were, should we need to adopt them. We are delighted through our relationship with Skyfarer, a Coventry-based drone startup company, who are now looking to implement beyond visual line of sight flights. And as we speak, 3 of our staff are being trained by Skyfarer in that next stage of next stage of aircraft, so that we can, when the time is right, we can put payloads on there, and as well as delivering medical supplies, at the same time we can have a camera on there and we can be testing that out. But again, that would form part of a communications plan with the public, and to promote what we're doing. And certainly our relationship with Urban Airport and Skyfarer is, why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we come to private industry? Because as the police service, we don't have all the answers and we don't have all the skills.
Yeah, that's true. I'd like to ask Maria a question. So one of the problems that there is here, I think, is when you're trying to talk to the public about this, is they can't see it, they can't hear it, they don't know what you're asking them something theoretical. When you go to Urban Airport, you actually see it for the first time, and you can see and you can talk to people, and there's potential. How on earth, and you said boiling the ocean, and you're absolutely right, how on earth do you start to give people a real understanding of both the benefits but the challenges of urban air mobility, drones, all the way up to passenger flights? How on earth do you actually start to have that realistic conversation? Not, yes, this is going to be great, you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Phil. I think I try always to take off my my air mobility hat and just sort of think, well, if I didn't know anything about it, what would I need to do to get myself convinced, basically, and what would I need to see and feel and touch and hear? And I'm a great believer that a lot of us are visual thinkers, and we need to experience it for ourselves. And so we just had a fantastic opportunity, where was it, the first weekend of May, to go to Fully Charged, which was held at Farnborough. And so we were joined by 5 other partners of ours, including Tech Tower, Matt, and we were able to flying the air mobility flag very high, to actually showcase to the public of 23,000 people who turned up to an electric vehicle event and a clean technology event, to showcase to them what an electric aviation industry is working on. And again, rather than doing all the speaking there, no matter how much I love talking to people, I do want to go out there and show them things. They excite us. And so things that Matt was working on, we also had Airspeeder with their physical model, their aerial racing solution. We had Nebo Air with the Pipistrel, the first certified and flying electric aircraft, fully electric aircraft that is already taking people on sightseeing tours here in the UK. We had Motion Robotics with their actual drone, in-house drone solution, and the robot solution doing the demonstration there, not flying, but still a sort of on the floor demonstration. We had all of that, and we had ourselves there to support our partners. And I think that was, a picture was worth than a thousand words. We still had the panel discussions as well, and to sort of help people understand that journey. But it's so important for us to, for us as an industry, to be that transparent, and for us to do those demonstrations in public, and especially go to those events where people don't necessarily expect to see us. So Flightcrowd, we'll be going to Farnborough Air Show, we'll be going to Riata Air Show this year, and potentially a couple of other events, because again, I really think that we need to be there. We need to be a part of that already known and famous aviation community, but also we need to showcase how we, as was mentioned previously by the colleagues on this panel, how do we fit into the wider mobility ecosystem? How do we fit in the future, the electric transportation future? How are we going to work together with all these other modes of transportation? So yeah, basically to answer your question, we're trying to really go and show everything that our partners are doing, because that's when people really get excited, because they can see it's tangible, it's something they can understand. But yeah, hopefully we'll be seeing much more of those demonstrations, especially in this part of the world where we weren't as blessed.
That's great. Matt, one of the ways we can do this, I absolutely fully subscribe to the idea that this has to be an inclusive, supported community initiative as well as an industrial initiative. So the community will have to want this. And one of the ways that we can help is create the kind of digital models so they can see what's flying, they can see who's flying, they can see what kind of operation is available, and they have some sort of, not just passive, but they can ask for things, and things will be done. Can we create that kind of digital metaverse for, to include communities in that whole collaborative process?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. And indeed, I don't just see it, as a nice to have or an optional extra. I see it as something that needs to be front and center of what we do. One of the biggest challenges I can see going forward, and this is a lot of this is coming from not just traditional aviation, but actually working with the OEMs to get vehicles through type certification, which is a big part of our business. Is you've got a sense that you've got increasing autonomy in our airspace. Decisions are being made by systems, not necessarily by people anymore. And even with things like we're beyond visual line of sight, even something as simple as that, ultimately you are now flying by wire via camera. All of that comms channel's got to work. All of that has to work. Everything's got to work safely. We've got drones that are in the sky now that are not necessarily gone through a full, SIL 4 safety critical, development. Okay, and now what implications does that have as that scales out? Is quite important. The public need a right to say that so this isn't being done to them; it's being done with them. Now. One of the things is on the one hand, I said earlier that it's great that we've got this positive spirit, that nobody speaks particularly negatively about drones, but also there are some fundamental technical, really hard challenges and aspects to that, which it's not necessarily that the general public are going to understand all the nuances and finesses of it. So for instance, as you scale up the airspace, do we have enough bandwidth to actually stay in comms with all 76,000 aircraft? We've got more aircraft in uncontrolled airspace over urban areas. What happens in terms of sensing and detection? Multi-path interference is a big issue. These kind of technical things need solving alongside the public you know, the public perception. And if you do one with the other and you don't move in lockstep, you're going to find that at some point that great amount of trust we've got right now will start to eke away. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, I think a metaversical approach, if you like, and if that is indeed a word, I think is the right way forward. I mean, I'd be quite interested to hear Darren's views, to be fair, on what next steps for urban airports. You know, with things like, for instance, the EASA Vertiport spec, for example, and the other initiatives that I know that you guys have got going on. I would like to know how you guys are conquering and winning some of these battles that you're having to face.
This is something we're going to look at in the next section. But I would like to ask Darren this. I mean, you're absolutely right. But where do we capture all this stuff and put it? It'd be great if there was one place where we could capture all these what we've learned, the lessons, the concepts, and put them all in one place where everybody can access. I mean, that's something which Savata is trying to do. But Darren, where do you think this debate should take place? What's the best environment for this, so we can capture public, regulatory, industry issues and bring them all together and then move forward in some kind of consensus? How do we actually physically do that?
Well, it's interesting the past 2 weeks as we engage with the public, and I think Maria's quite right, Matt's quite right, that there's a complexity of issues out there which the public are not aware about. And I think, well, that's the whole point of having the interaction in the past 2 weeks, is that you draw attention to the fact of things that they don't see. It's very easy to do the touch and feel. You can feel the vertiport, you can experience navigating internally. You can see flights taking on and off, but they're not going anywhere. And I touched on this yesterday, that until you can carry out a flight from A to B, that you start to make people realize, well, there's a flight path that needs planning. There's all sorts of consent permissions that you need to have in place. You need to have a look at the safety aspect of to enable that journey. All these things and all the environmental impact that follows it, it's not visible yet. And we would like, as a next step, to be able to demonstrate that. And of course, it requires the collaboration of many players, as well as the regulators. We only touched upon it, the tip of the iceberg in terms of having this demonstration in Coventry. We need, as Matt says, to take it to the next step. And the issue there is really, it's not the will of the partners in the ecosystem. It's perhaps more about funding, which we also touched upon yesterday. And in terms of having a repository of all the input, comments, ideas, that's a good question, Phil, because we ourselves have recorded the comments from the public of those from our industry partners, and we've asked our visitors to kindly leave feedback, because there's a QR code in the exit out from our demonstrator at Air One, and they could leave comments there with Flightcrowd, with Coventry University, with UAP, with any one of our partners, and have their voice recorded and have their say heard. But absolutely, the next step is the critical. We've done it this far in terms of having a vertiport in place. We want to be able to have extended VLOS. We want to be able to have BVLOS, and really show the world the true impact of having to plan a flight profile through people's backyard, and that is the reality. If it's backyard, it could be over roads, could be over waterways, could be railways, but these are the options we're all discussing at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Darren. So that's the end of the third session, and we're going to quickly move into session number 4, where we look at the urban airport that's been built in Coventry and look at some of the concepts behind it, and then start to tease out some of the really particular issues, like the operational and the legal issues that what we've seen in Coventry, these issues, how these issues have been raised. And we're going to kick off this next session. By the way, thank you, Matt, who's had to leave us now. It's very helpful involvement. So can we run the next video? It's not too long, but it looks at some of these issues in a bit more detail.
We have a phased approach to it. So we will take what we see here today. We will build a second prototype as well, what we call our city box. And the city box is very much catered more to the logistics drones that you see here today flying. And the idea would be you would do a what's called a VLOS, a visual line of sight flight, to develop the CONOPS between the two and the standard operating procedures and how command control interact with that, how the airspace would be segregated, how we integrate with a number of flights. Then you expand that, so you then take that second prototype, the city box, and you extend it further into what's called extended VLOS, and then into BVLOS, which is beyond line of sight. We've got our own weather station, which tells us whether we can have crosswinds that might affect the aircraft to take off and land, which is on that screen. We have on this, which is our Altitude Angel UTM, Unifying Traffic Management capability, is where we can approve or reject aircraft. So the list that you see there is a section of the number of flights we have conducted within the airspace that we've around Air1 at the moment. So the idea would be that you can, a pilot would go onto the Altitude Angel system, say that they want to fly on this at this location on this particular day, and the payload, the capability that they need. So it gives the information of the pilots, the type of aircraft that they fly, and any sort of requirements that they need to fly safely. So if we then move over to this screen, this is our map of the area. So the red sections that you see, so the lower red section is the Coventry airspace flight restriction zone, and we have to discuss and agree with the Coventry Airport that we are allowed to fly with the aircraft that we have stationed here at Air1. So the blue little dot on the upper left-hand segment, that is our designated airspace, which Coventry Airport has provided a NOTAM to allow us to fly in a certain area at a certain time with certain aircraft. And then on the following upper section is the Birmingham flight restriction zone, so we don't actually fly. We don't have an agreement with them at the moment, so we don't fly into that area.
Well, we're actually working with Coventry University at the moment, and we're trying to develop the VLOS. So at the moment we have to keep our aircraft in visual line of sight, and we've got a maximum range of 500 metres, which obviously restricts some of our operations. So along with academia and other sort of technicians, we're developing how we can fly beyond that. We can sort of do things like, at the moment we're restricted, so we can't follow stolen car, for example, down the Dual Carriageway or motorway, but hopefully in the future we can develop that and sort of hopefully have that facility open to us. Another thing that we're looking at is remote flying, so flying, having a drone located permanently to a static point, maybe near a city centre, and when there's an incident in that city centre, as opposed to a car having to drive there and deal with that incident, we could remotely fly the aircraft from a central control area into the area and have a look at what's on the ground, have a quick assessment of what's there, and then from that we can decide what resources we need to put into it.
So another important thing about this Air1 project, the Urban Air Mobility Vertiport in Coventry, it's a hub for integrated technologies, not just aircraft taking off and drones taking off. And here we have a hydrogen fuel powered generator effectively, which takes hydrogen in a fuel cell, has a byproduct of water, but then supplies electricity to the vehicles you see around me, and also to the drones, and perhaps in the future the eVTOLs. And this is important because it effectively means that you can provide your own energy sources off-grid. It's like a portable generator, if you like. And as indeed the vertiport is a portable airport which can be taken down and put up wherever you want. This shows perhaps the way the future is going to go. It requires more than just thinking about the way we fly as a new way of flying, but it's a new way of having these stakeholders into an integrated new world, and having to think about energy transportation and flight in a different way. And that's why I think this is important at Coventry, because it shows a lot of different stakeholders suddenly coming together with complementary products to really change the way that we transport people and goods.
There we go. I'm delighted to be joined now by two real heavyweight pioneers of the urban air mobility industry. Richard Ryan from Blackerstones, who's going to give us some legal insights, and Daryl Swanson, Electric Aviation Strategic Advisor to NASA. I'd like to start with Richard, please. I mean, having seen what happens at Coventry, where you have basically an air traffic control center, you have a command and control center, you have an airport, integrated local authority, transport links, you have first responders operating there. How clear are we where the legal boundaries and legal responsibilities lie within that multi-universal hub, if you like, that small airport, but operating air traffic control center hub? How clear are we at the moment as to everybody's responsibilities?
To answer your question, Phil, I think it's very foggy at the moment. It's probably the best way I can describe it. Certainly, when it comes to construction and engineering projects, we certainly have a great deal of expertise in that area, and some of the synergies that we can take from that we can employ in setting up the infrastructure around a hub, as you described in your video, a UAV hub or a drone taxi hub, whatever way you want to describe it. So with respect to the infrastructure, we already have that in play. That versus so there are at least three things running here. So we've got the infrastructure around construction engineering to set up the hub itself. Then we've got the airspace considerations and the regulatory environment around that. And then what we've got is the private sector or the third parties that interact with both the other two. And how do they contract all together in order to make all of these integrated technologies, to coin the phrase that you just used in your video, to make that hub actually work for the benefit of everybody, but also it's got to be economical to use, and there's got to be an absolute business case for it. And one thing that certainly in my mind that when I first saw the FAA's ConOps version 2, where they set out the UTM architecture, one can see all of the players. Well, I suggest that most of them are there. All of the players there, from the UAS service supplier, the UAS operators, how that links out to public safety and the flight information management system run by the regulator. And then you have other third parties providing supplemental data service. And as we saw in that video also, you had a UTM provider and weather being provided. So where does the legal obligations for all of those sit when we correlate those to let's build a vertiport and let's deal with the regulation around that and deal with the regulation around airspace change to make it actually work. And so I'm glad Jolanta, the cat didn't meow like we saw on a video last year in lockdown. But I think, taking all that together, what we have is an environment where it is foggy. People are still trying to find their way through the mist in order to get themselves some degree of certainty, so they can actually make a calculated assessment of risk versus cost and reward in order to get to where they want to. So I think that's a very brief summary of what is going to be a complex environment for which we're all going to be working in. And I'd say, those that are astute will have a legal advisor on board quite early on in their journey.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you. A very legal answer. Daryl, does everybody in the industry have a very clear view about what a vertiport is, what it should do, who should be working there, what their roles and responsibilities are? Could you give us some view as to where we are in everybody? I mean, we all know what happens at an airport. Do we really know what happens at a vertiport?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I come from the background of an aviation consultant. So I've spent the last 25 years planning and designing airports, helping people operate them, and spending a lot of time helping people buy airports. And for my sins, I'm a board member of the British Aviation Group, which is a gathering of about 200 companies in the UK who are all in this sector. Asked them a few years ago about advanced air mobility, and they go to advance what? And people aren't never going to fly on drones, but they're finally coming around to it. But I would say that as an industry professional, we have a good idea of what advanced air mobility is and what a vertiport is and should look like. I think the question is really about volume of operations. So what does a busy vertiport look like? What does a commercially viable vertiport look like? And to me, that's a high volume of aircraft operations because they have relatively low seat numbers, but also trying to get the turnaround times quite low so that you can facilitate passengers getting through that process. And where that translates through is on the operations on the ground. So again, it's going to be very important to get the vehicles turned around and passenger operations going through. And then how that translates into the air. And that's maybe a bit where I agree with Richard that there is some gray and foggy bits, but I would also couch that by saying we have existing commercial vertical operations. So we've had VTOL operations for the last 40, 50, 60 years. It's just not happened at volume. So I really think it's a question of volume. But I'm also encouraged by the fact that the drone industry is actually blazing the trail. And I'm a big believer that the drone industry will actually solve a lot of these problems for us because they're going to need that technology faster because they can get to volume faster than we can. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Well, I'll take that back. I am optimistic that these challenges can be solved because we've got the time, there's the money out there, and we've got a great group of people that are working to solve this.
Great, thank you. I wonder, Jolanta, I mean, you speak to an awful lot of people in the States from all sides, industry and local authorities. How, again, same question, how mature is the understanding of what the final systems will look like? And are there variations between states and cities as to what the roles and responsibilities of the local authorities versus the industry and the regulator will be? Are we heading towards some kind of consensus, or is it still very local, a very local view about what it's going to mean to their city?
Well, a great question, and I think it's both. You know, of course, here in the U.S., all of our land use planning, building permitting is all regulated at local and sometimes state level. However, of course, airspace management through the FAA and regulation is at the federal level. So I think what we're seeing are those municipalities, those cities and states that are, taking the lead in being proactive in integrating advanced air mobility and planning for this. And we're starting to see how that's manifesting itself in different locations. And it doesn't look the same. It's very much dependent on not only what those local regulations are, but also what the needs are and what the other challenges are. Is it a city that already has a robust public transit system? So this is looking to augment that, or is it an area that doesn't have a robust public transit system and is dealing mostly with single occupancy vehicles on highways? So you do see variations. I think what we are seeing, and I would say a lot of this is kind of coming together through our cohort program and building that peer network that allows us to try to build some model policies and best practices around this. I think what we're understanding is that the lever at the on the part of the local municipality is certainly through land use regulations, through site, the permitting and of siting of vertiports, and as well as building permits and fire codes, etc. But it's that integration, that point of land use and those points where this air system touches the ground is where these two kind of communities of regulators come together. And I think it will be really important to see how that actually manifests itself. There's certainly a lot of conversation about that. Here in the States, we have a strong legal history precedent for federal preemption of airspace. Basically, that says that the FAA has control over the safety and operation of the national airspace. But we've never, won't say never, we rarely need to litigate what that looks like where the airspace meets the ground. And that's really where this industry is going to grow, whether we're talking about small drones or advanced air mobility. And I think my prediction is that what we will see is the conditional use permits, the permitting of vertiport siting coming with conditions that may include restrictions on flight hours, on volume of operations, on noise levels, that are all relevant to where that vertiport is located and the community around it and the community that will be impacted by the routes.
Thank you. And I think you absolutely, you've really nailed it there when you said it's where the air hits the ground. That's the area now where we need to get some kind of clarity, I think, and whether it's going to be a general clarity or a particular clarity. And Maria, so when you go around and speak to people and they are concerned about wildlife, and they say to you, okay, well, who's going to be responsible for protecting the birds, the migrating birds, or the flocks of birds that occasionally occur? Who is actually, whose job is it to make sure that they're going to be safe? What do you say to them?
That's a great question, Phil, because I love answering the questions that no one else is answering in the industry. Well, so we always say that, we as an industry are working collaboratively, and it really isn't just one man's job. It is for people. It is something that needs to be shared. It needs to be a problem and a question that the vehicle manufacturers resolve, and when it comes to vehicle design, when it comes to vehicle operations, but it's also the air traffic management solutions. If we're talking specifically about bird migration and impact of wildlife on the vehicle operations, but it's also, again, it's the infrastructure, it's the regulatory body. So it really is, again, we start talking about the ecosystem and the need to engage with various ecosystem stakeholders. But to be honest with you, again, we're sort of finding ourselves in a position to not only be answering those questions and trying to, I guess, alleviate some of the fears and some of the questions that people have, but also trying to actually bring those questions back to the industry and say, look, have you actually considered this? Because a couple of conferences ago, I met somebody who is working in bird migration. They said, you know what, we've never been reached out to. Nobody has ever spoken to us, and it is really concerning because the vehicles, we're talking specifically about eVTOLs, your air taxis, if you wish, them, but also the drones. They'll be the altitude where they'll be operating is precisely where the birds normally fly. That's sort of the same part of the airspace, and so this really needs to be one of the critical. I'm sure Daryl has explored that issue quite a lot when working on traditional airports. This is very, very important when it comes to traditional aviation but we only consider birds when it comes to takeoff and landing mainly. But here we're talking about operations, most of the operations happening at that altitude where it's just not really safe. So we start thinking about the safety aspect. We start thinking about, again, the impact of this new technology on the nature around us, and are we again just building everything similar to how we used to build the roads for cars? Are we now building the basically the airspace for vertical takeoff and landing vehicles and not for birds? It is a complex thing, but yeah, I don't know if maybe Joel, if you want to provide any input, maybe you've done anything around that, or you've worked with other colleagues who sort of started looking at it, or Darren, especially you guys. I think the infrastructure, I'm very interested to hear what you think about it.
Right. So if I can.
That did turn up in conversation last week, actually, from a member of the public. The issue of wildlife and birds in particular. And the only response I had through my experience, and it's similar to Daryl's, I would suspect, is that like in any airport, you undertake the environmental impact assessment and you look at wildlife habitats around the airports. And of course, as Maria highlighted, those pertain to usually takeoff and landings and those points. But the operational level of drones is actually, yes, below 400 feet, which obviously is the level of the flight of birds coinciding with the flight of drones. So it is an issue that needs looking into, and quite right, there's not much study done on that, and perhaps the work done on that is not readily accessible at the moment. But absolutely, that's an area that we do need to look into, and the public are aware about that. They're not so aware about issues of privacy as such, but you do get comments about wildlife.
Daryl, yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say, Darren and Maria, there is actually legislation out there where airport operators have to do wildlife hazard assessments, and it's some of the work that I do in my aviation safeguarding work. So I help people get tall buildings near airports. So safeguarding issues and wildlife hazard management is a big issue. The specific risk areas are not necessarily the vertical takeoff component because the aircraft is going slow and birds can avoid the aircraft, obviously noise. Probably the more sensitive areas when the aircraft is in transition, when they're between vertical flight and the horizontal flight, if they're transitioning into it. So there's a bit of a sweet spot there. Jolanta, I think Cami had an expert speaking about wildlife hazard management, or I remember seeing something at the VFS, the Vertical Flight Society. Somebody was speaking about certain altitudes which aircraft operations are susceptible at. So there is a set of data out there. But equally, on our NASA TVF working group, we have a company called Aviaire who's supporting us by providing a chapter on wildlife hazard management and how that's going to be applicable to vertiports. And I suspect that will be part of the licensing application for vertiport as a commercial operation, that you'll have to provide those types of assessment. And I would suggest that under the UK context, that any vertiport operator definitely wants to get themselves set as a designated aerodrome, because under the ODPM, so the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, certain aerodromes are designated as safeguarded, and that gives them a lot of safety under legislation that would protect them from other developers putting up tall buildings that would impact on flight paths, or doing things that would attract birds in that will be a hazard for them. So that's that bit. The other bit I wanted to comment about was again in the TVS white paper that we're doing for NASA. We have a specific chapter on system planning. So it's about how does system planning look like for a vertiport in the city, and where are they crossing over. And I would point people towards Clint Harper and the work that he's doing in LA, because I know that they're coming out with a paper shortly on what their sensitivities are around planning. So there's lots of stuff out there. It's just trying to dig around and find it and get up to speed with it.
Phil, if I
Thanks.
may, just to jump in on that and just pull on that a little bit more. So I have done some work around this in the UK with respect to the environment, and we do have the Wildlife and Countryside Act, and we also have habitat regulations. And when I certainly looked into this, what was absolutely key is that there has to be an assessment with respect to low-level overflight around these habitats to a degree, with respect to whether or not there's going to be a significant impact on special sites of scientific interest or special areas of the environment as they're categorized. So usually SSSI and the like. And of course, if there isn't, then there's no issue. Going back to Yulanka's point, of which I've got two strands. One is the environmental piece of where the air clearly meets the land that we all have to deal with. And then we've got where with respect to environment, but also with respect to people, and then the noise piece. So we've got to deal with the assessment of impact on wildlife to a degree, but the organizations that are around that absolutely have no legal authority to challenge it, except for maybe judicial review, which is quite lengthy. Am I talking? Yes, I am. Yeah, I wasn't sure I was on mute. Sorry. All of that time, and also with respect to people and whether or not noise and the like are going to be a nuisance. And there is some case law around this, but it's not absolutely clear on what that actually means. And to your point, Phil, with respect to your question, I think some of this is actually going to get tested in the courts, and people will start challenging the powers of local authorities to be able to implement certain decisions, and that would be potentially subject to some form of judicial review, but also with respect to the other powers that they try to employ in order to exert some degree of influence. So you're going to have this conflict between that and the same as in the US, the Civil Aviation Authority here regard the airspace as a state asset. It's nobody else's asset, and everybody's got a right to fair and equitable use of the airspace. So at what point do we meet in the middle whereby we satisfy the nuisance piece, whether it's people or the environment, and we enable fair use of the airspace? And I think just pulling on that slightly more, the assessment of risk around that at the moment, from my PhD studies, what I'm seeing is that there's going to be a real fragmented view and application of airspace management, because whether it's a state or a government, they all view risk quite differently. And you've got, I think, I think at the last count, there are over 90 companies professing to provide some sort of UTM service, all with different views around risk and everything else. Where do we go with this? And I think it's that harmonization of rules. And ICAO, I know, have got up a working group, and Daryl Ulanka are doing some great stuff as well with NASA to try and put in place some degree of harmonization, so we have that degree of clarity. Sorry, I just couldn't resist.
It's really good. And on that, we now have an EASA view of what a vertiport looks like and an FAA view of what a vertiport looks like. I'd be very interested to hear. Sorry, Kerry, we'll come to you in a minute, I'm sure. But for the moment, I'm a bit of a going off piece a bit. But could somebody provide me with a very broad understanding of the similarities and differences between the European and the US view of what a vertiport comprises? Or not?
Right. Well,
I don't think we've got enough time.
Yeah. So I've been looking at it, and there are a couple of key differences in them. I think performance-based design standards is probably at the heart of it. The FAA is a bit more performance-based. EASA and as Rex Alexander would call it, the cone of death, is something that he definitely doesn't like. I personally like it just from a planning perspective because it might give more flexibility. If anybody goes on to the Vertical Flight Society or Rex Alexander's LinkedIn profile, he's posted a letter to the FAA, which is a response, a very detailed response. So he's collected responses via the Vertical Flight Society and sent it on. And I had the distinct pleasure or displeasure of going through it line by line. And there were some very good comments, and then there are the usual annoying ones of dotting T's and crossing I's, amendments that need to be made to it. But my view of that, or the comments there, is that there are differences in terms of about the size or the weight categories. So there are challenges there, and whether or not a helicopter will be able to use a vertiport or a vertiport will be able to use a heliport. There's issues about the approach and departure profiles. There's nothing in there about curved approaches, again, which could be very important in an urban context where you want to be as flexible as possible. So those are the key ones that I'm starting to see come out of it. But then again, you really need to get into it. The other side of it is the FAA ones. Well, they're both still pretty provisional. So there's lots of room for change. And if anybody hasn't really picked up on it, the FAA have actually changed their mind on the certification rules for aircraft in the US. And that's thrown the cat amongst the pigeons and has really raised the question of, will some of these major OEMs be able to meet the timelines to get certified, or do they have enough money to get certified now? So yeah, everything is in the air.
Quite often, yeah. Sorry, Phil. Quite often it is the case where the law is playing catch up with technology, and here we've got, especially with the EASA proposal of a vertiport, a framework where the law will be built from in advance almost of the technology. And so from my point of view, it's quite interesting, because how much influence does the regulator have to shape the development of future technology versus what the commercial environment is saying that they can do with the technology, and what is actually achievable. And I think we're going to see a bit more tension played out between the two here, and how this develops, I think, is going to be incredibly interesting.
I'm conscious of the time. We've talked about a lot of things, birds, we talked about vertiport designs. I'm going to add throw another brick into the pond, and this is one for Kerry. We need to make sure that the airspace is secure. What's the police's role in Coventry, but elsewhere? How do you see your role in making sure that the airspace above us is safe, and that if there are rogue zones, are identified and dealt with?
How long have we got? Yeah, it's really interesting because we're in that kind of, well, I'd say that transition phase, isn't it? It's that post Gatwick, let's put a flight restriction zone around every airport, and let's clamp down on this, and we'll have the registration. Yeah, so as well as being a team that actually deploys drones for safety and preventing crime, catching criminals, the drone team have a responsibility to, dare I say, police the skies. And there is technology out there that that alerts us when drones are flying in restricted areas. But Keith Bennett, my colleague, who's the drone sergeant lead, he tends to use an approach around kind of education in the first instance, where it is a kind of where people don't really understand what's going on, which can be difficult really, because it really is simple and straightforward as to what you have to do in the UK if you buy a drone in terms of your flyer ID and your operator ID. But where people aren't using such things as the Altitude Angel Drone Assist app, it is a case of actually having a conversation with the operator, explaining what's going on, a bit of education, and that's the way that they deal with that. Thereafter, if it's a deliberate criminal act, then it is something that actually sits with the police. And these are the kind of conversations that we've been having with regards to Urban Airport. So the fact that you've got other operators flying out of Urban Airport, but actually it's our job to make sure that they're doing that within the in the guise of what the CAA regulations are all about. And we will all know, those that are in general aviation and all kinds of things, drone legislation, this kind of legislation is probably the most difficult and complex that I've ever experienced in any of my time as in 30 years in the police service. But yeah, we are there to police the skies. There is equipment available. As I say, we start from an educational point of view, but actually if enforcement is needed, then so be it.
Well, I mean, that's a really interesting area. So it's not, we come back again to this multi-agency. There's so many people involved in this.
Yeah.
And you said something there which I think was very interesting, is that you have a responsibility for policing the skies, and that's not a regulator's responsibility. That's not a CAA responsibility. That's a police responsibility.
Yeah, the CAA have been quite clear with regards to that CAP 722. It is around that we would prosecute. Yes, we can link in with the CAA in terms of advice and guidance, but ultimately it is ourselves as the prosecuting agency. And we're starting to see instances that it's in the press where you've got DJI Mini 2s flying over football grounds recently where that's happened, and then it kind of everybody starts to panic. So yes, it's an interesting area, but it is one that we just need to keep on top of and make sure that drones are flown safely, responsibly. We're not here to, we're not anti-drone hobbyists. A lot of the drone pilots themselves have got their own kind of equipment. This is about safe use of the skies and responsible use of drones so that people can enjoy them in a responsible way.
Thank you.
If I may just come on that. Thanks, Kerry. I think that's really useful. I think education is certainly the best place to start. When the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Act became law, just prior to that, I was working with members of the House of Lords on amending that piece of legislation with respect to its impact on commercial operators, for example, because some of the terms in there or some of the police powers are based on a subjective belief by a constable at that time with respect to what a commercial operator might do. And from my view, it was trying to get the balance between good and proper and fair policing versus a commercial operator being able to grow their business and do well for the economy and develop our economy so we don't stifle innovation in any way. I think we're yet to see the benefits of that with respect to how this legislation pans out. But I do believe that there is a bias there because it was all framed around the counter unmanned aircraft policy document, which treated everybody as a nefarious user, smuggling stuff into prisons and everything else. So I would be, I'd be very interested in the next 12 months or so to actually see what the results of that are going to be like and how that might impact on. I can understand how it might impact on vertiports because we have heliports, we have aerodromes, we have airports, and we've got an established framework in place that protects those. The vertiports piece isn't quite set, obviously, because we don't really have a functioning vertiport at the moment. But it'll be quite interesting to see how that works out in the future.
And we've obviously, as you would imagine, we've had conversations around the protection of Air One and Urban Airport, and actually, of course, to make sure that that's protected and that sits with us.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say on Gatwick, there's been absolutely no evidence that a drone was there at that point in time.
We are on the same page. So, yeah, and everybody and everybody has suffered as a result, as you've said there. Everybody has suffered as a result. I've even had to challenge my local council who wanted to ban the use of all drones from their land, looking at a bylaw from the late 1860s, which also prohibited cycling in my local park. But I won't get on my soapbox about that.
I've seen that too around mechanical devices, and
That's it. You got it. I've been asked to
sorry, Phil.
I'll tell you what. I can just see this vast load of cul-de-sacs we can go down from here on in. I'm going to try and drag this back. Maria, when you speak to people, where does and their views of the industry and their concerns, where does security fit in the kind of hierarchy of safety, of privacy, of collecting data on people? Are people worried about security in the same way that they're worried about safety?
Yeah, I think it really depends, Phil, who you're talking to. So again, we at the moment conducting various engagements and workshops and activities for everyone starting at the age of 5, and sort of primary schools all the way to your adults, your 50 plus. And so it really does depend on who the audience you're talking to. I think the safety is still one of the concerns for drones. Which is interesting again, especially given that we are much more familiar with drones, and that is sort of, if you remember the EASA study, public acceptance study that was done earlier last year, that was one of the, in fact, I believe that was the main concern for drones, safety. However, again, very much in line with that, for air mobility, it was other things. So it was your noise concerns, it was your environmental worries, and security and safety was sort of there, but not at the top of the list. So I don't know. I think it really does depend who you're talking to. But as I mentioned, I think we are certainly working with everyone in our community, going back to the whole educational point. I don't pretend to know all the answers, but I know that there are, again, so many stakeholders who are working on these solutions to make sure that we don't have those worries about safety and privacy and security and noise, etc. And so we always try and sort of, have a number of different speakers and number of partners of ours from various sort of parts of the ecosystem to share their perspective and to educate people on what is the work that is being done in this in their specific sector. So yes, it is safety and security are sort of out there, but interestingly enough, and again very much in line with what the EASA's public acceptance study found, it's more of a question for drones, and air mobility is other things like noise.
Okay, so one or two other things which I'd like to talk about very briefly, but before I do that, I'd like to ask Darren something. Is there any reactions you've had at Air One which will change your next design, which will change the way that you want to go forward, either from the public or from industry or for anywhere else?
We had an interesting comment the other day, the fact that, and this is from user experience side, that when an aircraft takes off, you're not able to see it when you're inside the vertiport. Now, that is correct, because when the FATO is in the elevated position, you have no view of the aircraft. I had to point out to the gentleman that in the original design, we did have roof lights, and for cost reasons, for budget reasons, we didn't put those in. Otherwise, you would get a glimpse out through to the aircraft taking off and landing. But then I also pointed out at an airport, you'd be very lucky to see an aircraft take off at the end of the runway. You commonly see passengers boarding and disembarking and connecting to jet bridges. So for this design of vertiport, our Air1, because the 180-degree window onto the FATO gives the immediate showcasing of the technology of the aircraft and of advanced air mobility. So that's intact and no different than what you would experience at an airport. But the ability to see it actually take off is probably best for the moment viewed beyond the 50-meter safety zone, which in our case outside the vertiport. Any other comments? No, not in particular. That one played to my mind because in view of some of the guidance coming out from EASA in terms of the dimensioning that's required, FATO, we do need to progress our design to address some of the some of the draft guidance that's in circulation at the moment, as well as the FAA. But I tend to think that the EASA is the better one for us to follow for the moment in terms of the dimensioning of the airside. Yes, again, more work to be done, and it's taking feedback not just from the regulatory authorities, but from end users and people who has visited Air1. So these are good insights that we're getting.
Thank you very much indeed. So we've only got about 10 minutes left. I'd like you all just to think about some final remarks. We've seen quite a lot at Air1 of how one vision of a vertiport and urban air mobility might look. And we've also discussed loads of different topics. I mean, unfortunately, we haven't talked about hydrogen yet, which is something which I really wanted to talk about. But I'd like to get your 2-minute roundup view as to where we go next. So we've got something great here in Coventry. What should we do next to accelerate the industry? It could be revenue, it could be law, it could be operations. Who should who should be out there really between now and 2024, when the regulations and the standards could be available for eVTOL operations, certainly in France, perhaps elsewhere, or that might be an exemption. We might have to wait till 2030 or something before it's more widespread. What should we be doing next? I'd like to start with Daryl, please.
Oh gosh, well, you caught me there. What should we be doing next? For the UK context, I think we need national planning guidance because it doesn't exist at the moment. Right now, local authorities are just trying to figure out what needs to be done. And I think that the government needs to come up with that guidance to give the local authorities something to measure a planning application against. A couple of weeks ago at the eVTOL Insights, Vertical Aerospace was there, and I asked them a question: how would you go about getting planning applications? Would you do a top-down approach from the government, or would you go bottom-up? And quite clearly, their advice was, we have to do it from a bottom-up, because right now you have to partner with local authorities and get them on board, because they're going to be your key stakeholder, and they're also going to be the ones that will help you through the whole process. But once we get the national planning context, then it makes things a little bit easier. So that's where I'd like to see industry focus. I think the rest of the technology that'll sort itself out. There's money chasing that.
Okay, great. Jolanta, what do we do? What do we do next?
Well, I'm going to agree with Daryl, and take it a step further, or maybe a step back and say, I think it's really incumbent on us to further work with communities and planners and agencies to develop the opportunities and that demand side of the equation. And because I think all of the risk assessments, all of the potential litigation or regulatory developments that could happen are all going to be based on that balance between the public benefit versus adverse impacts. And the broader that we can make that public benefit, I think the less challenges we'll have on the back end from a legal and regulatory perspective. So, you know, I like to use the example, I live on an island west of Seattle, and we have one landing spot on our island, and that's at the fire station, and it's for a medevac helicopter. And when that helicopter takes off from the island to head to the trauma center in Seattle, it flies low right over my house, and it's loud, but all of us know the value of that helicopter and what it means for those of us who live on the island. So that kind of socio-psychological aspect of understanding the value that is inherent in this form of transportation is going to be really critical as we go forward, because we know there will be adverse impacts, whether it's noise, whether it's visual pollution, whatever it is, there will be impacts. And we need to balance that with a sense of broad public benefit.
That's a brilliant answer. Thank you. I'm going to ask Richard now. You're not allowed to agree with Daryl or Jolanta.
Okay, I don't agree with Daryl or Jolanta at all.
I'm fired.
What I would say is that I actually think that the regulator in the UK needs to be much bolder. And where we've seen predefined risk assessments from the EASA regulations, they've really helped the industry. What we need to do is push forward with more of those predefined risk assessments. And here I'm going more to cargo and low risk outside urban areas, and really make that an established use case, because we know it's lower risk. In order just to develop and understand that technology a lot more, we can improve public perception. It's going to be low risk, and there's going to be a business case that the commercial world can see, use and benefit from. And I think what we can do with respect to the point that Daryl made around UK and local planning authorities is maybe take it out of the local authorities gambit, and being slightly contentious here, operate an HS2 model. So where we're putting a stamp on the railway, it's now a government decision as opposed to a local authority one. And we go to the government and say, we want vertiports here, here and here. And we work with the central government in order to make that happen, which would mean that it has to become law, much like HS2 development has been.
I see the logic in it, but I think cutting the local authorities out like that, when especially Coventry, which has been driven by a remarkable CEO with chutzpah, which otherwise it might not happen, it's an interesting dynamic. Like that.
I did say it's contentious, but don't forget, any central government would include local authority within their planning and decision-making cycle anyway. So those concerns by a local government would be taken into consideration, but it'd be against the aims and objectives of central government with the establishment of vertiports in the UK to further enhance the opportunity and actually give us, as in the UK, a business advantage over Europe, for example.
Okay. Hi, Kerry. What about you? What do you think we should be doing now?
I think we should continue with our quest in terms of securing public consent and public buy-in as to what's planned. We have secured a Channel 4 documentary in early 2023, so the opening up of what we do to the masses will be visible via our TV screens next year with 6 times 60-minute episodes. So we're really looking forward to that, to show the public what we do. I'm going to pick a little bit up on what Richard said. I think not in any way shape or form diluting safety, but there is a certain stigma, I think, around, you know, those within general aviation, around the drone community, and that certainly sub 400 feet, there needs to be, certainly from an emergency services perspective, around BV loss, some kind of, shall we say, relaxation of the rules, not to compromise safety, but that kind of, that first BV loss in, you know, built up areas where they can be operated safely, because I think that will be the forerunner for what actually comes. So let us try and do that in a safe and a controlled environment, but actually free up the skies for the emergency service use, which will then be the trailblazer for cargo and flights with people on board in the future.
Thank you. This is all terrific stuff. Hi Maria, what do you think? What should be our priorities?
God, I think it is very difficult not to agree with everyone else, because everyone else mentioned what I do on a daily basis, which is public engagement and acceptance. But hey, I'll try and provide something. Okay, it's all right. It's all right. It's great to see they're all on the same page, because when you asked that question, Phil, everyone, I really thought, oh God, you know, there are as many opinions as there are people in the room. But realistically, again, this just proven to me that we're more or less all on the same page, and we all see the same challenges, and moreover, we all work on the same challenges. So fingers crossed, we'll get there very shortly. But in terms of what I think needs to be done soon now, I was talking to somebody at Fully Charged, and the influence of the persona, the leader, a strong leader in the world that we live in, a strong leader, a business leader, and how we are always following companies and buying from companies that we can trust. Your Steve Jobs and your Apple, your Elon Musk and your Tesla. I'm personally not a big fan of Elon Musk, and probably this shouldn't be recorded, but anyhow, but the fact that these people have had or have that strong persona and that strong following, and even the fact that they're controversial, really, again, makes their products and their companies that they're working on, you know, just always making the news. And again, I think going back to my, and I think all of our experience working in traditional aerospace, traditional aviation, defense, we really don't see those business leaders being so vocal about their specific position, about their views, their opinions, and you know, how things should be done, their vision for the future. And I think this really needs to change in air mobility, because people buy from people. Because again, at the end of the day, sorry, we are the ones who invent technology, but not only invent technology, but to make it work for us. And it really does depend on us, on the industry leaders at the moment, whether there will be a public who will trust us and will want to get on board of these vehicles and will want to use our infrastructure solutions. And it is for us to really decide and to really shape, and we can only do so by being transparent, by being open, because again, the public of 21st century values that openness, values that taking a stand, and values that being out there and doing the legwork, and not just being sat in your office behind the screen and, you know, nobody ever seeing you apart from your business colleagues. We need people who will be opening doors, who will be the friendly face of the industry, who will be very much there, you know, doing both the business side, but also the engagement with the public to make sure that we secure that public trust and buy-in. So it is, for me, it is all about the people, and it starts with us, and only setting our own, you know, sharing our own stories and setting an example of how we do things and why we're so passionate about it, can we really engage the future workforce and the future end user. But I think let's start here, because this is the easiest to change.
Another great contribution, and I'm sure there'll be one final one from Darren too on the next 2 years, Darren, what we need to do to actually go from A to B with Vertiports.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I guess I'll round it up with the experience from the last 2 weeks, actually. And what the last 2 weeks have taught us is the value of having a demonstrator project to showcase innovation that's not readily understood by the general public. And through this, what we would like to see is a greater rollout of demonstration projects for different municipalities, not just in the UK, because we've got Coventry, but we do like our international communities now to have their own version of Air One, to raise local awareness, to help shape public perception, and perhaps serving as a wake-up call for local authorities, because they're going to have to think about how they're going to put this through the planning system, and hopefully, and that's the lessons we've learned with Coventry. Perhaps we are having to also reach out to the national planning authorities to seek guidance, because certainly we're having to create a process at Coventry here, and we're still drafting what that planning application might look like. And I think as we all mentioned earlier, starting with Daryl, a national guidance in terms of a planning document would be useful to advance this.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. What I want to do is capture everything that we've done over the last 2 days, put it into a document, discussion document, and put it on our new social media website, which will be coming out very soon, and use this. But I've been to so many of these events where great ideas have come up, great discussions have come up, and they've just sort of disappeared into the ether. And I'm determined it's not going to happen this time. We'll grab everything that you said, which we can sort of value and importance to move the thing forward, perhaps use it as essential kind of key discussion document, because what you've said today, what was said yesterday, and all the participants who've been here have been absolutely fantastic. And thank you very much indeed for your time and trouble and the efforts you put in to do this. And I hope you found it worthwhile. You'll hear from us, Savata Global, very soon. But on behalf of everybody here, thank you for all your contributions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.